The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood at her bedroom window, watching the early preparations begin in the courtyard below. Staff members moved with quiet efficiency, their faces solemn as they arranged flowers and prepared for what would become one of the most difficult days in recent royal history. Kate's reflection stared back at her from the glass, her usually bright eyes now rimmed with the telltale signs of sleepless nights. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of private meetings, hushed conversations, and moments of profound uncertainty that had shaken the very foundations of the monarchy she had come to call home. 3 floors below, Prince William sat in his private study, surrounded by official documents that required his immediate attention. The weight of responsibility had always been heavy on his shoulders, but today it felt crushing. His hands trembled slightly as he signed papers that would change not only his life, but the lives of millions who looked to the royal family for stability and continuity. The decision had not come easily. Months of private deliberation, countless conversations behind closed doors, and sleepless nights had led to this moment. William knew that history would judge his choice, but the pressure from various factions within the establishment had become unbearable. The modern world demanded changes that seemed impossible to reconcile with centuries of tradition. Kate had been his constant companion through every step of this journey. She had listened patiently as he wrestled with impossible choices, offering wisdom beyond her years and support that never wavered. Together, they had tried to find a path forward that would honor both their duty to the crown and their responsibility to their children's future. The children remained blissfully unaware of the storm clouds gathering around their family. Prince George had asked that morning why everyone seemed so serious, his innocent question piercing through the carefully maintained facade that adults had constructed around the impending announcement. Princess Charlotte had noticed her mother's tears the night before, offering a drawing of the family as a rainbow to make Mummy happy again. Little Prince Louis, too young to understand the gravity of the situation, had simply climbed onto his father's lap during breakfast, babbling happily about the birds he could see in the garden. These moments of normalcy felt both precious and heartbreaking, reminders of what they were fighting to protect and what they might be forced to sacrifice. The palace staff had been sworn to secrecy, but rumors had begun to circulate in the corridors. Longtime employees who had served the family with unwavering loyalty found themselves caught between their duty to maintain discretion and their genuine affection for the young family that had brought such warmth and modernization to the ancient institution. Margaret, Kate's longtime lady-in-waiting, had worked for the royal household for over 30 years. She had seen marriages crumble, scandals erupt, and the monarchy weather countless storms. Yet something about this situation felt different, more final, more devastating than anything she had witnessed before. The private chapel where William and Kate had shared many quiet moments of reflection seemed unusually cold that morning. They had met there after breakfast, seeking solace in the familiar ritual of prayer and contemplation. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the stone floor, but even the beauty of the sacred space could not lift the heavy atmosphere that surrounded them. Kate's voice had been barely above a whisper as she spoke about her fears for their children's future. The relentless scrutiny, the impossible expectations, and the growing divide between public service and personal happiness had taken their toll on the entire family. She had entered royal life with enthusiasm and determination, but the reality had proven more challenging than either of them had anticipated. William's response had been measured and thoughtful, as always. He spoke of his grandmother's wisdom, his father's struggles, and the weight of expectations that had been placed on his shoulders since birth. The monarchy needed to evolve, but the pace of change seemed impossibly slow when measured against the urgent needs of their young family. The morning briefing with senior advisors had been particularly difficult. Constitutional experts, public relations specialists, and longtime palace insiders had presented various scenarios, each more complex than the last. The implications of their decision would ripple through British society, the Commonwealth nations, and the international community in ways that were difficult to predict. Public opinion polls showed a nation divided. Many citizens expressed deep affection for William and Kate, viewing them as the modern face of an ancient institution. Others questioned whether the monarchy itself had become an outdated concept in the 21st century. The pressure to make a decision that would satisfy everyone had become an impossible burden. The international media had begun to sense that something significant was developing. Photographers with long lenses had been spotted near the palace gates, and royal correspondents from around the world had started making discreet inquiries about unusual activity within the royal household. The palace press office had maintained their usual discretion, but the attention was intensifying by the hour. Kate's mother, Carol Middleton, had arrived early that morning through a private entrance to avoid the gathering media attention. Her face was etched with concern as she embraced her daughter, offering the kind of unconditional support that only a mother can provide. The Middleton family had always been Kate's anchor, providing stability and normalcy in a world where both were often in short supply. The conversation between mother and daughter had been long and emotional. Carol had watched her daughter grow from an enthusiastic university student into one of the most recognized women in the world. She had seen the joy of royal engagements and charitable work, but also witnessed the toll that constant scrutiny and impossible expectations had taken on her daughter's well-being. William's private conversation with his father had been equally difficult. King Charles, despite his own complicated relationship with royal duty and personal happiness, struggled to understand his son's position. The crown had been his life's purpose, and the thought of voluntary abdication seemed almost incomprehensible to him. The king's study, with its portraits of previous monarchs and shelves lined with centuries of royal history, provided a sobering backdrop for their discussion. Charles spoke of sacrifice, duty, and the sacred oath that bound them to serve the nation. William listened respectfully but remained firm in his conviction that change was necessary for the survival of the monarchy itself. Princess Anne had offered her perspective during a private lunch, speaking candidly about the challenges of royal life in the modern era. As someone who had successfully balanced duty with personal authenticity, she understood the pressures that William and Kate faced. Her advice was practical and compassionate, acknowledging that there were no easy answers to the questions they confronted. The Archbishop of Canterbury had been consulted in strictest confidence, his spiritual guidance sought as William grappled with the religious dimensions of his role. The conversation had been profound and searching, touching on themes of service, sacrifice, and the balance between earthly duty and spiritual calling. As afternoon approached, the final preparations for the evening's announcement began in earnest. Speech writers worked frantically to craft words that would explain the unexplainable, while protocol officers ensured that every detail of the formal process would be followed correctly. The weight of history pressed down on everyone involved in these final hours. Kate spent time in the nursery, playing with Louis and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for their youngest child. His laughter rang through the corridors, a bittersweet reminder of the innocence they were fighting to protect. She read him his favorite story twice, savoring every moment of these simple pleasures that she feared might soon become more complicated. George and Charlotte returned from school that afternoon to find their home filled with an unusual tension. Their parents made every effort to engage with them normally, helping with homework and listening to stories about their day. Yet the children sensed the undercurrent of emotion that their parents could not completely hide. The family dinner that evening was both ordinary and extraordinary. They gathered around the familiar table in their private dining room, sharing stories and jokes as they had countless times before. Yet everyone present understood that this might be the last time they would sit together in this place as the family they had always been. William looked around the table at the faces he loved most in the world. Kate's strength had been his constant throughout this ordeal, her wisdom helping him navigate impossible choices. The children represented everything pure and hopeful about their future, regardless of what changes lay ahead. These relationships would endure, he knew, whatever else might change. The evening light filtered through the windows as they prepared for what would come next. Phone calls had been made to key family members, ensuring they would hear the news directly rather than through media reports. The Queen Consort had wept openly upon hearing the news, her tears reflecting the profound sadness that many would feel in the hours to come. Palace security had been increased discreetly, anticipating the media frenzy that would follow the announcement. Roads around Kensington Palace were quietly monitored, and additional staff were positioned to manage the expected chaos. Yet inside the palace walls, an unusual calm had settled over the family as they prepared for their final evening together in their current roles. As night approached, William and Kate stood together on the balcony overlooking the garden where their children had played so many happy hours. The city lights twinkled in the distance, representing millions of people whose lives would be affected by the decision they had made. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but they drew strength from each other and from the certainty that they were choosing love and family above all else. The formal announcement would come in just a few hours, but this quiet moment belonged to them alone. They spoke softly about their hopes and fears, their dreams for their children, and their commitment to each other regardless of what the future might hold. The tears came freely now, tears of sadness for what they were leaving behind, and tears of hope for what lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring unprecedented challenges, media scrutiny beyond anything they had experienced before, and questions that would take years to answer. But tonight, in the gathering darkness of their final evening as senior royals, they held each other close and prepared to face whatever came next with the same unity and love that had brought them through every challenge they had faced together. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of the state dining room where William sat alone, staring at the prepared statement that would change everything. The words seemed inadequate to express the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Behind each carefully chosen phrase lay months of anguish, soul-searching, and impossible choices that no amount of royal training could have prepared him for. Kate found him there as the grandfather clock struck 6, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. She had barely slept, spending most of the night checking on their children and trying to memorize every detail of rooms that had become so familiar over the years. Without a word, she settled into the chair beside him, their shoulders touching in a gesture of solidarity that had sustained them through countless challenges. The palace kitchen staff had arrived extra early, knowing that this would be no ordinary day. Mrs. Henderson, the head cook who had prepared family meals for over 2 decades, worked with tears streaming down her face as she prepared what might be the family's final breakfast in their royal home. The simple acts of cooking and serving had taken on profound significance as everyone struggled to process the enormity of what was happening. Upstairs, the children remained peacefully asleep, unaware that their world was about to change forever. George's room was filled with model airplanes and pictures of his family at various royal events, innocent reminders of a childhood spent in the unique intersection of privilege and duty. Charlotte's walls were covered with her own artwork, colorful expressions of a little girl's joy that seemed almost magical in the context of the somber mood that had settled over the palace. The secure phone in William's study had been ringing constantly since 4 in the morning. Prime ministers from Commonwealth nations, heads of state, and senior government officials were all seeking clarification, guidance, and reassurance about what the unprecedented announcement would mean for international relations and constitutional stability. Sir Edmund Hartwell, the palace's most senior advisor, had served 3 generations of the royal family. His weathered hands shook as he reviewed the cascade of protocols that would need to be followed in the coming hours. Nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for managing a voluntary abdication from someone so central to the monarchy's future. The constitutional implications alone would require months to fully understand. Kate's personal secretary, Sarah, had worked through the night coordinating with various departments to ensure that ongoing charitable commitments would be handled appropriately. The Duchess's diary was filled with engagements scheduled months in advance, each representing causes and communities that depended on royal support. The human impact of this decision extended far beyond the palace walls. The Archbishop of Canterbury arrived at 7, his face grave as he was escorted through the private corridors to meet with William and Kate. The spiritual dimension of royal duty had always been central to their understanding of service, and his counsel would be crucial as they navigated the religious implications of their choice. The conversation that followed was intense and deeply personal, touching on themes of calling, service, and the sometimes competing demands of faith and family. Media vans had begun gathering outside the palace gates before dawn, their presence growing steadily as royal correspondents sensed that something significant was developing. The palace press office maintained their usual discretion, but the unusual activity and increased security measures had not gone unnoticed by experienced royal watchers. Inside the palace, staff members who had devoted their careers to serving the royal family struggled to maintain their professional composure. Many had formed genuine personal attachments to William, Kate, and their children, viewing them not just as employers but as a family they had watched grow and evolve over the years. Thomas, the head gardener, worked mechanically among the roses that Kate had particularly loved, knowing that she might never see them bloom again in this setting. The children had often helped him plant bulbs and had learned the names of flowers during their explorations of the extensive gardens. These simple, precious memories now felt impossibly poignant. The Queen Consort had requested a private meeting before the official announcement, arriving through a discreet entrance to avoid the gathering media attention. Her conversation with Kate was emotional and deeply personal. Two women who had both learned to navigate the unique challenges of marrying into the royal family, sharing their fears, hopes, and mutual support. King Charles paced his private study, the weight of his son's decision pressing heavily upon him. He understood William's concerns about the toll royal life had taken on their family, having experienced similar pressures himself. Yet the thought of losing his heir, his son, and his grandchildren from the direct line of succession felt like a personal and institutional tragedy beyond measure. The conversation between father and son that morning was perhaps the most difficult either had ever experienced. William spoke passionately about his love for the monarchy and his deep respect for its traditions, but also about his conviction that radical change was necessary for its survival. The children, he argued, deserved a chance to choose their own path rather than being trapped by accidents of birth. Charles listened with the patience that years of royal training had instilled, but his pain was evident in every line of his face. The crown had been his life's purpose, shaped every decision he had made, and defined his understanding of his place in the world. To hear his son voluntarily walk away from what he had spent 70 years preparing for was almost incomprehensible. Princess Anne arrived mid-morning, her practical nature and direct manner providing a different perspective on the unfolding crisis. She spoke frankly about the sacrifices required by royal life, but also about the genuine good that could be accomplished through the unique platform it provided. Her own children had been raised with minimal royal duties, and she offered insights into the possibilities of a different kind of royal life. The children's nannies had been briefed on the situation and instructed to maintain normal routines as much as possible. George and Charlotte would attend school that day, their last day as students who would return home to Kensington Palace. The normalcy of homework, playground games, and afternoon lessons would provide a stabilizing contrast to the chaos that was about to engulf their family. Kate spent precious time with each child individually, reading stories, helping with simple tasks, and creating positive memories that would help them through the difficult transition ahead. With George, now old enough to sense that something significant was happening, she spoke carefully about changes that lay ahead while emphasizing the constants that would remain: their love for him, their commitment to his happiness, and their determination to protect his childhood as much as possible. Charlotte, sensitive and intuitive like her mother, asked direct questions that were difficult to answer without revealing too much. Kate's responses were gentle but honest, preparing her daughter for changes while maintaining the security that children need to feel safe in an uncertain world. The legal and constitutional experts who had been consulted over the previous weeks arrived throughout the morning for final briefings. The implications of William's decision extended far beyond his immediate family, affecting the line of succession, the future of the Commonwealth, and the constitutional arrangements that had evolved over centuries. Parliamentary officials had been quietly informed of the impending announcement, and emergency sessions were being planned to address the unprecedented situation. The Speaker of the House had been asked to prepare for possible debates about constitutional reform, while legal scholars worked frantically to research precedents and procedures for what was essentially an unprecedented event. International allies and diplomatic partners were being briefed through secure channels, ensuring that key relationships would not be damaged by surprise or misunderstanding. The special relationship with the United States, the complex dynamics of the Commonwealth, and the delicate balance of European royal relationships all required careful management during this transition. The financial implications were staggering and complex. Royal estates, trust funds, security arrangements, and the economic impact on tourism all needed to be carefully considered and managed. Teams of accountants and lawyers worked through scenarios that had never been seriously contemplated before. Kate's parents arrived for what they knew would be their final family lunch in these surroundings. The Middleton family had always provided a grounding influence, representing the normal world that existed beyond palace walls. Their presence reminded everyone that happiness and fulfillment were possible outside the constraints of royal duty. The meal was deliberately casual and relaxed, with James and Pippa Middleton joining to provide support and normalcy for the children. Uncle James brought card tricks and silly jokes, while Aunt Pippa helped with a jigsaw puzzle that had been challenging the family for weeks. These simple pleasures took on extraordinary significance as final memories were being created. During the afternoon, William made a series of phone calls to military units, charitable organizations, and institutions where he served as patron or president. Each conversation was difficult, as he attempted to explain his decision to people who had depended on his leadership and support. Many were shocked, some were disappointed, but most expressed understanding and respect for the courage required to make such a difficult choice. The evening news programs were already speculating about unusual activity at the palace, though none had yet grasped the full magnitude of what was about to be announced. Royal correspondents who had covered the family for years sensed that something unprecedented was developing, but the palace's traditional discretion had prevented any leaks of the actual content. As afternoon faded into evening, the family gathered in their private sitting room for what they knew would be their final hours together in this familiar setting. The children played quietly while William and Kate sat close together, speaking in low voices about practical arrangements for the days ahead. The announcement had been scheduled for 10 o'clock that evening, allowing time for key officials to be properly briefed and for security arrangements to be finalized. The words had been written and rewritten dozens of times, each draft attempting to capture the complexity of emotions and motivations that had led to this moment. Kate's final walk through the palace took her to rooms filled with memories of official functions, private celebrations, quiet moments of reflection, and the gradual transformation of a building into a home. Each space held stories of growth, learning, joy, and sometimes sorrow as she had learned to navigate her unique role in British society. The nursery where all three children had spent their earliest years seemed particularly poignant. Toys that had been loved by multiple generations lay scattered on shelves, while family photos captured moments of pure happiness uncomplicated by duty or obligation. These images would be carefully packed and moved to their new life, carrying forward the love that had always been at the center of their family story. William's private study, where he had spent countless hours learning about constitutional history, preparing for future kingship, and grappling with the weight of inherited responsibility, would soon belong to someone else. The books on monarchy, democracy, and leadership that had shaped his thinking would remain behind, along with the formal portraits that had reminded him daily of his place in the long line of royal succession. As the hour of the announcement approached, they sat together as a family one last time in the comfort of their private apartment. The children had been gently prepared for the fact that big changes were coming, though the full implications remained beyond their understanding. What mattered most was the love that surrounded them, and the promise that their parents would always protect and care for them. The statement had been distributed to major news organizations with an embargo until exactly 10 o'clock, ensuring that the news would break simultaneously around the world. In a few minutes, everything would change forever. But, in this quiet moment before the storm, they held each other close and drew strength from the bonds that would endure whatever challenges lay ahead. Exactly 10 o'clock in the evening, newsrooms around the world erupted into controlled chaos as the embargo lifted, and the most shocking royal announcement in modern history became public knowledge. The carefully crafted statement, delivered simultaneously to every major news organization, contained words that no constitutional expert had ever expected to read. The heir to the throne was voluntarily stepping away from the line of succession. Within minutes, television programming across the globe was interrupted by breaking news bulletins. Anchors struggled to maintain their professional composure as they read words that seemed almost impossible to believe. The BBC's royal correspondent, who had covered the family for over 2 decades, paused mid-sentence as the full implications of the statement became clear to her. Inside Kensington Palace, William and Kate sat in their private sitting room, watching the coverage unfold on the television screen that had been hastily installed for this purpose. The children had been put to bed early, shielded from the immediate chaos, but not from the profound changes that would reshape their lives forever. Kate's hand found William's as they watched their carefully chosen words being dissected and analyzed by experts who struggled to find historical precedents for what they were witnessing. The decision that had taken months of agonizing consideration was now being debated by commentators who had only minutes to process its significance. The statement itself was remarkable in its honesty and emotional depth. William had written much of it personally, his words reflecting the pain of choosing between duty to country and duty to family. He spoke of his deep love for the monarchy, his respect for its traditions, and his belief that it would ultimately be stronger without the burden of unwilling participants trapped by circumstances of birth. King Charles was in his private study at Clarence House when the announcement became public, surrounded by senior advisors who were already fielding calls from government officials, Commonwealth leaders, and heads of state around the world. His face showed the strain of a man who was watching his life's work fundamentally altered by forces beyond his control. The Prime Minister had been given advance notice, but, even with time to prepare, the constitutional implications were staggering. Emergency meetings were being convened to address questions that had never seriously been considered before. What happened to the line of succession? How would this affect the Commonwealth realms? What precedent was being set for future generations? Public reaction was swift and polarized. Social media platforms exploded with commentary ranging from heartbreak to anger to admiration for the courage required to make such a choice. Hashtags supporting the family trended worldwide, while others demanded explanations for what many saw as an abandonment of sacred duty. Outside the palace gates, crowds had begun to gather despite the late hour. Some came to show support, others to express their shock and disappointment. The mixture of emotions was visible in faces illuminated by camera lights and smartphone screens as people struggled to process what this meant for the country they loved and the institution they had grown up respecting. Commonwealth nations were grappling with questions that went to the heart of their constitutional arrangements. In countries where William would have automatically become head of state, urgent consultations were taking place about the implications for their own governance structures. Some saw this as an opportunity to finally sever colonial ties, while others worried about the stability that royal continuity had provided. The Queen Consort released her own statement within an hour, expressing support for William and Kate's decision while reaffirming the monarchy's commitment to service. Her words were carefully chosen to acknowledge the family's pain while maintaining confidence in the institution's future. The delicate balance between personal sympathy and constitutional responsibility was evident in every phrase. International leaders began issuing statements of support for the family's right to choose their own path, while expressing continued friendship with Britain regardless of constitutional arrangements. The President of the United States, in a hastily arranged press conference, spoke of the strong bonds between the nations that transcended any individual personalities, though his personal fondness for William and Kate was evident in his voice. Religious leaders around the world offered prayers and support for a family facing an unprecedented crisis. The Archbishop of Canterbury's statement emphasized themes of calling, service, and the sometimes competing demands of different forms of duty. His words carried special weight given his role in the original coronation ceremonies and his ongoing relationship with the royal family. As midnight approached, the true scale of the media response became clear. Every major newspaper was redesigning their front pages, television networks were extending their programming, and reporters from around the world were booking flights to London. This was not just a royal story. It was a constitutional crisis that would have implications for generations. Kate's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family members, and colleagues from her charitable work. Each text represented a relationship that would need to be renegotiated in light of their changed circumstances. Some offered unconditional support, others asked questions she was not yet ready to answer, and a few expressed the kind of disappointment that cut deeply despite being expected. The children's schools had been contacted by security officials and prepared for the media attention that would inevitably follow. Special arrangements were being made to protect their privacy during what would be an incredibly difficult transition. Teachers and administrators who had worked hard to provide normal educational experiences now faced unprecedented challenges. William's military colleagues were particularly affected by the news. His service with the Royal Air Force had been a source of genuine pride and personal fulfillment, representing one of the few areas of his life where he could be judged on merit rather than birth. The bonds formed during military training and service were deeply personal, and leaving them behind was one of the most painful aspects of his decision. Charitable organizations that had benefited from royal patronage were already beginning to grapple with the practical implications of the announcement. Many had built their fundraising and public awareness campaigns around royal involvement, and the sudden loss of such high-profile support would require immediate strategic adjustments. The financial markets opened in Asia to significant volatility as traders attempted to price in the implications of constitutional uncertainty. While the direct economic impact was likely to be limited, the psychological effect of such unprecedented change was evident in currency fluctuations and tourism-related stock movements. Palace staff worked through the night managing an avalanche of media requests, public inquiries, and logistical challenges. Phones rang constantly as journalists, officials, and members of the public sought information, clarification, or simply the chance to express their feelings about the stunning announcement. Security arrangements were being hastily revised to account for the massive increase in public and media attention. The normal protocols that governed royal protection had never been designed for a situation where senior royals were voluntarily leaving their roles. New assessments of risk levels and appropriate protection measures were being conducted on an emergency basis. The legal implications were staggering in their complexity. Constitutional lawyers who had spent their careers studying royal succession were being consulted about scenarios they had never seriously contemplated. The palace's senior legal advisors found themselves in uncharted territory, with centuries of precedent offering little guidance for the current situation. Parliament would need to consider whether new legislation was required to formalize the changed succession arrangements. The relationship between statute law, common law, and royal prerogative in matters of succession had evolved over centuries, and adapting these complex arrangements to unprecedented circumstances would require careful consideration. International constitutional experts were being consulted about the experiences of other monarchies that had faced similar challenges. The abdications of European royals in the past century provided some guidance, but none had occurred in circumstances exactly comparable to the current situation. Kate spent the early morning hours packing personal belongings and deciding what should be moved to their new life and what should remain as part of the palace's historical collection. Wedding gifts from world leaders, christening presents from family members, and thousands of photographs documenting their years of service all needed to be sorted and distributed appropriately. The process of separating personal possessions from official property was emotionally exhausting. Items that had been part of their daily lives for years suddenly needed to be categorized as either private belongings or assets belonging to the crown. Even simple things like children's artwork and family photographs required careful consideration. William walked through the state apartments one final time, rooms where he had hosted world leaders, attended official ceremonies, and gradually learned the complex protocols of royal life. Each space held memories of growth, learning, and the slow process of accepting the responsibilities he had inherited. Now he was choosing to leave it all behind. The throne room, where he had participated in countless official ceremonies, seemed particularly symbolic as he prepared for his final departure. The chairs where he and Kate had sat during state visits and formal receptions would soon be occupied by others, continuing traditions that stretched back centuries while adapting to new realities. Morning brought renewed intensity to the media coverage as newspapers around the world published special editions attempting to analyze the implications of the previous night's announcement. Editorial writers struggled to find adequate words for what many described as the most significant constitutional development in living memory. Public opinion polls conducted overnight showed a nation deeply divided in its response. Many expressed understanding and sympathy for the family's decision, while others felt betrayed by what they saw as an abandonment of sacred duty. The generation gaps in response were particularly notable, with younger people more likely to support the right to choose personal happiness over inherited obligation. Commonwealth prime ministers were scheduling emergency meetings to discuss the implications for their own constitutional arrangements. Some saw this as an opportunity to accelerate Republican movements that had been gaining momentum, while others worried about the stability that royal continuity had provided to their political systems. The Archbishop of Canterbury announced special prayers for the royal family at churches across Britain, acknowledging the pain and difficulty of their decision while asking for divine guidance during a period of unprecedented change. The spiritual dimension of royal service had always been central to the monarchy's identity, and the religious implications would require careful consideration. As the first full day after the announcement began, William and Kate prepared to leave Kensington Palace for the final time as senior working royals. Their new life would begin immediately, without the gradual transition they might have preferred. The world was watching, history was being made, and their quiet family crisis had become a global phenomenon that would reshape the monarchy forever. The tears that had been held back for so long finally came freely as they walked through rooms that had been home for so many years, knowing they would return only as visitors to a life they had chosen to leave behind. The weight of their decision pressed down upon them, but so did the relief of finally being free to choose their own path forward, whatever challenges it might bring. The morning after the announcement dawned gray and misty, as if nature itself was reflecting the somber mood that had settled over the nation. William stood in the empty nursery at Kensington Palace, where just hours before his children had played innocently, unaware that their world was about to change forever. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of gathering crowds beyond the palace gates. Kate found him there, her own eyes red from a sleepless night spent making final arrangements and saying goodbye to rooms that had become deeply familiar over their years of residence. They embraced without words, finding comfort in each other's presence as they faced the first day of their dramatically altered future. The children had been taken to their grandparents' home the evening before, sparing them the immediate chaos of media attention while their parents completed the formal transition process. George had asked why everyone seemed so sad, his innocent question cutting through the careful explanations his parents had attempted. Charlotte had simply hugged her mother tighter, sensing emotions she could not yet understand. King Charles arrived at the palace shortly after dawn, his face showing the strain of the previous night's emergency consultations with government officials, Commonwealth leaders, and senior advisors. The conversation with his son was private and deeply emotional, two men who loved each other deeply, trying to bridge a gap that seemed almost unbridgeable. The king spoke of his own struggles with duty and personal happiness, acknowledging that he understood William's pain better than anyone else could. Yet the thought of losing his heir, and with him the future that had been planned for decades, represented a personal and institutional trauma that would take years to fully process. William's response was gentle but firm. He spoke of his deep love for his father and his genuine respect for the monarchy as an institution. However, he could no longer ask his children to sacrifice their freedom of choice for the sake of constitutional continuity. The world had changed too dramatically for the old arrangements to remain viable without modification. The formal documents required for the transition were extensive and complex. Constitutional lawyers had worked through the night preparing papers that had never been needed before, drawing on precedents from other monarchies and adapting them to British circumstances. Each signature represented another step away from the life William had been born to lead. Princess Anne arrived mid-morning with her characteristic directness and practical wisdom. Her conversation with Kate was particularly meaningful, one royal spouse to another, sharing experiences that few people could truly understand, and spoke candidly about the sacrifices required by royal life, but also about the genuine satisfaction that could come from service to others. The media presence outside the palace had grown exponentially overnight, with news crews from around the world establishing positions for what was clearly going to be an extended period of coverage. The palace press office was overwhelmed with requests for interviews, statements, and access, while security officials worked to manage crowds that grew larger by the hour. International reaction continued to pour in throughout the morning. Commonwealth prime ministers issued statements ranging from understanding support to barely concealed disappointment. Some saw this as an opportunity to accelerate discussions about Republican governance, while others worried about the destabilizing effect on carefully balanced constitutional arrangements. The Queen Consort spent time privately with Kate, offering the kind of support that only someone who had navigated similar challenges could provide. Their conversation was deeply personal, touching on the unique pressures faced by women who marry into the royal family and the difficulty of maintaining personal identity within such a structured institution. Staff members throughout the palace struggled with their own emotions as they helped prepare for the family's departure. Many had formed genuine personal attachments that went far beyond professional duty. Mrs. Henderson, the head cook, wept openly as she prepared what she knew would be the family's final meal in their royal home. The children's belongings required special attention as personal items were separated from official property. Toys that had been gifts from world leaders needed to remain with the palace, while treasured books and personal artwork would accompany the family to their new life. Each decision required careful consideration of protocol and precedent. William's private study was gradually emptied of personal items, leaving behind the formal portraits and official documents that belonged to the institution rather than the individual. The books on constitutional history and monarchy that had shaped his understanding of royal duty would remain for his successor, whoever that might ultimately be. The financial arrangements were staggering in their complexity. Trust funds, property arrangements, and security provisions all needed to be renegotiated to reflect the family's changed circumstances. Teams of lawyers and accountants worked frantically to ensure that the transition would not create legal complications for the monarchy or the departing family members. Parliamentary leaders were briefing opposition parties about the constitutional implications and the government's planned response. Emergency sessions were being scheduled to address questions about succession, the role of Parliament in royal matters, and the potential need for new legislation to formalize the unprecedented situation. Religious leaders across Britain and the Commonwealth grappled with the spiritual implications of William's decision. The Church of England, with the monarch as its head, faced particular challenges as it considered what this meant for the relationship between crown and faith that had been central to British identity for centuries. Educational institutions where William and Kate had served as patrons or chancellors were beginning to understand the practical implications of losing their royal connections. Fundraising campaigns, academic ceremonies, and public relations strategies all needed immediate revision to account for the changed circumstances. Military units with which William had served were particularly affected by the news. His colleagues in the Royal Air Force expressed private support for his right to choose his family's future, but many struggled with feelings of abandonment and loss. The bonds formed during military service had been among the most genuine relationships in his royal life. Charitable organizations that had benefited from royal patronage faced immediate challenges as they worked to maintain momentum without the high-profile support that had driven much of their fundraising and public awareness efforts. Some had built their entire strategic plans around royal involvement, making the sudden change particularly disruptive. Kate's final walk through the palace took her to every room where significant family moments had occurred. The drawing room where they had celebrated birthdays, the garden where the children had learned to walk, the study where she had worked on charitable initiatives. Each space held memories that would need to sustain her through the challenging transition ahead. The formal handover of official duties required William to brief his father and other senior royals about ongoing commitments and responsibilities. Patronages that had been central to his identity would need to be redistributed, while ceremonial roles would require immediate reassignment to ensure continuity of service. King Charles struggled visibly with the weight of taking on additional responsibilities at a time when he had hoped to be gradually passing duties to the next generation. The careful succession planning that had guided royal strategy for decades would need to be completely reconsidered in light of William's departure. The children were brought back to the palace for a final goodbye, their innocent questions about why everyone was crying providing heartbreaking moments of clarity about what was truly at stake. George hugged his grandfather tightly, promising to visit often, while Charlotte gave drawings to palace staff members she had grown fond of over the years. Little Louis, too young to understand the magnitude of the changes, simply enjoyed the attention from so many adults who clearly cared about his happiness. His laughter echoed through corridors that had become unusually quiet, a reminder of the joy that family life could bring even in the most challenging circumstances. The final press statement was released as afternoon faded into evening, providing additional context for the decision and outlining the practical arrangements for the transition. William's words were carefully chosen to express gratitude for the support they had received while acknowledging the pain their decision had caused for many people. Security arrangements for their departure were complex and unprecedented. While they would retain some level of protection given the ongoing threats associated with their former roles, the full apparatus of royal security would no longer be available to them. Risk assessments and protection protocols needed to be completely reconsidered for their new circumstances. The drive away from Kensington Palace that evening was emotional beyond anything they had anticipated. Crowds lined the route, some waving and showing support, others standing in respectful silence as they witnessed the end of an era. The children waved back from the car windows, unaware that they were participating in a historic moment that would be remembered for generations. Their new home, purchased privately and prepared in secret over the previous weeks, represented a return to something approaching normal family life. The house was modest by royal standards, but luxurious by any other measure, providing the space and privacy they had craved while maintaining appropriate security and comfort for the children. As they crossed the threshold of their new life, William and Kate knew that the easy part was over. The public announcement had been made, the formal transition completed, but the real work of building a new identity and purpose was just beginning. They had chosen love over duty, family over obligation, but they had also chosen uncertainty over the security that royal life had provided. The weight of their decision would become clearer in the days and weeks ahead, as they learned to navigate life without the structure, support, and clear sense of purpose that royal duty had provided. They had gained their freedom, but they had also lost the certainty that had guided their lives since their wedding day. The world watched with fascination and concern as this unprecedented chapter in royal history began to unfold. Constitutional experts debated the implications while ordinary citizens struggled to understand what this meant for the monarchy they had grown up respecting and the family they had come to love. As their first night in their new home began, William and Kate held each other close, drawing strength from the love that had sustained them through this impossible choice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring the first real opportunity they had ever had to define their own future and create the life they wanted for their children. The tears came again as they reflected on everything they had given up and everything they hoped to gain. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was their path to choose, and that freedom, however frightening, represented the hope that had made this painful sacrifice worthwhile. 6 months after the announcement that shocked the world, William stood in the garden of their new home, watching his children play with a freedom they had never known before. The weight of constant security, rigid protocols, and public scrutiny had lifted gradually, replaced by something that felt remarkably like the normal family life they had always dreamed of but never believed possible. The transformation had been neither easy nor immediate. Those first weeks after leaving royal life had been among the most challenging of their marriage, as they struggled to define new identities and purposes while managing the intense global attention their decision continued to generate. Every public appearance was analyzed, every choice scrutinized, as the world tried to understand what their unprecedented step meant for the future of monarchy itself. Kate had thrown herself into establishing new routines for the children, working to create stability amid the chaos of their changed circumstances. School runs that had once required elaborate security arrangements now became precious moments of normalcy, though photographers still occasionally appeared to capture images of the former royals living their new life. The children had adapted with the resilience that young people often display when faced with dramatic change. George, now old enough to understand that his future had been fundamentally altered, had initially struggled with questions about his identity and place in the world. Patient conversations with his parents had helped him understand that while his circumstances had changed, their love and support remained constant. Charlotte had blossomed in ways that surprised everyone, her natural confidence growing as she discovered activities and interests that had been impossible within the constraints of royal life. Dance classes, art lessons, and simple playdates with school friends had opened up worlds of possibility that royal protocol had previously made difficult or impossible. Little Louis remained largely oblivious to the magnitude of what had occurred, though he clearly enjoyed having his parents' undivided attention during moments that would have been interrupted by official duties. His innocent joy continued to remind them daily of what they had fought to protect and preserve. William had faced perhaps the greatest challenge in redefining his sense of purpose and identity. Raised from birth to assume the throne, his entire education and worldview had been shaped by that expectation. Learning to see himself as simply a husband and father, rather than a future king, required a fundamental reorganization of his understanding of his place in the world. The charitable work that had always been close to his heart continued, though in different forms, and without the automatic platform that royal status had provided. Organizations focused on mental health, conservation, and homelessness welcomed his continued involvement, though fundraising and public awareness efforts required new strategies without the royal connection. Kate's adjustment had been somewhat easier, perhaps because she had chosen royal life as an adult rather than being born into it. Her natural warmth and genuine interest in others had always been her greatest strengths, and those qualities remained valuable in their new circumstances. Several charitable organizations had approached her about continued involvement in causes she cared deeply about. The relationship with the broader royal family had evolved slowly and sometimes painfully. King Charles struggled with profound sadness at the loss of his son from the line of succession, though he worked hard to maintain their personal relationship. Family gatherings had become more complex, requiring careful navigation of changed dynamics and altered expectations. Princess Anne had provided unexpected support during the transition, her practical nature and understanding of the pressures of royal life making her advice particularly valuable. She had helped Kate understand how to maintain meaningful charitable work while protecting the family's privacy in ways that had not been possible during their royal years. The Queen Consort had maintained regular contact with Kate, their shared experience of marrying into the royal family creating a bond that transcended the constitutional implications of William's decision. Their private conversations had provided crucial emotional support during the most difficult moments of adjustment. Public opinion had gradually shifted as the initial shock of the announcement faded into acceptance of the new reality. Polling showed that while many people still felt sadness about the decision, growing numbers expressed understanding and even admiration for the courage required to prioritize family happiness over inherited duty. The constitutional crisis that many experts had predicted had been managed through careful legal work and political compromise. Parliament had passed legislation clarifying succession arrangements while affirming the monarchy's continued stability under King Charles's leadership. The precedent had been set without undermining the institution itself. Commonwealth nations had responded in varied ways, with some using the opportunity to accelerate republican movements while others reaffirmed their commitment to monarchical systems. The diversity of responses reflected the complex modern reality of the Commonwealth as an association of independent nations rather than a unified imperial system. International relationships had required careful management as diplomatic protocols were adjusted to account for William and Kate's changed status. Former heads of state and government leaders who had developed genuine friendships with the couple found ways to maintain those relationships while respecting the new reality. Security arrangements had been scaled back, but not eliminated, reflecting ongoing concerns about threats related to their former roles. The family had learned to live with reduced but still significant protection measures, finding a balance between safety and the normal life they had sought. Financial independence had been achieved through careful management of inherited assets and new income streams. William's work with various organizations provided both purpose and financial compensation, while Kate's involvement in media projects related to child development and family life had proven both meaningful and lucrative. The media attention, while still intense by normal standards, had gradually decreased as other stories claimed public attention. The family had learned to manage their public profile more actively, choosing when and how to engage with press coverage rather than being subject to the constant scrutiny that royal life had demanded. Educational arrangements for the children had been carefully planned to provide both excellent learning opportunities and appropriate privacy. Schools that had experience with high-profile families had been selected, ensuring that George, Charlotte, and Louis could have as normal an educational experience as possible. The house they had chosen as their new home had been modified to provide appropriate security while maintaining the comfortable, family-friendly atmosphere they had always wanted. Gardens where the children could play freely, rooms for quiet family time, and space for the charitable and business meetings that were becoming part of their new routine. William's relationship with his military colleagues had evolved but endured, with many expressing continued respect for his service and understanding of his difficult choice. The bonds formed during his time in the Royal Air Force remained strong, providing important connections to a part of his identity that had always been personally meaningful. Kate's friendships from before her royal years had been rekindled and strengthened as the constraints that had limited those relationships were removed. University friends, neighbors from her childhood, and colleagues from her brief professional career had all become part of their support network once again. The children's relationship with their royal cousins required careful management to ensure that family bonds remained strong despite the changed circumstances. Playdates and family gatherings continued, though with new dynamics that everyone was still learning to navigate successfully. Therapeutic support had been crucial for all family members as they processed the magnitude of the changes they had chosen to make. Professional counseling had helped them understand and manage the complex emotions associated with leaving behind the only life they had known for something completely unprecedented. The anniversary of their departure from royal life had been marked privately, with quiet reflection on the year of transformation they had experienced. The pain of what they had given up remained real, but it was balanced by genuine satisfaction with the life they were building together. Looking toward the future, William and Kate were finally able to make plans based on their own desires rather than constitutional requirements. The children's education, family travel, charitable commitments, and professional opportunities could all be considered from the perspective of what would make them happy and fulfilled rather than what duty demanded. The tears that had marked their farewell to royal life had been replaced by different emotions: relief, excitement, uncertainty, and hope. The path ahead remained unclear in many ways, but it was their path to choose, and that freedom had proven to be worth the sacrifices they had made to achieve it. As evening fell on another day in their new life, William and Kate sat together watching their children play in the garden they could finally call their own. The weight of the crown no longer pressed upon their shoulders, replaced by the lighter but no less important responsibility of raising happy, healthy children who would be free to choose their own destinies. The silent moment that had broken so many hearts had ultimately led to healing, growth, and the discovery of what happiness could look like when love was allowed to triumph over obligation. Their tearful farewell to duty had become a joyful embrace of the life they had always dreamed of living together. The story that had begun with such heartbreak had evolved into something hopeful and beautiful, proving that even the most painful choices can lead to unexpected grace when made with courage, love, and unwavering commitment to what matters most. Their new chapter was just beginning, and for the first time in their lives together, they were free to write it themselves.